Hello, I'm Mike Cisco, and welcome to my IT Humor segment of the IT Manager Institute channel. Today's video is number 4, Too Many Diskettes. Do you remember the good old days in IT? Well, I'm about to share some days probably back before you were in IT. I'm going to take you back all the way to 1978 when I was an IBM systems engineer. Here's a photo of me giving a presentation back in my SE days. Around 1978. My hair was much darker, I was thinner. These were great times, I can tell you. It was also a time where you saw a lot of think plaques like this one on customers' computers, on their desktops and so forth. They'd either purchase or they'd be given these from IBM. It was the time of the mini computer. I don't know if you know of these days, but these were exciting times. There were a lot of first-time computer users in these days. They were buying their first computer ever. It was a highly competitive time and lots of new sales and installations going on. So as an IBM SE, that was my job, to install new computer systems we sold in our office. I was located in Jackson, Mississippi. Great group of people there. Had a lot of fun as an IBM SE. Worked hard, played hard. Great time as an IBM SE in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a highly competitive environment. IBM was the major vendor in the Jackson, Mississippi area, but we also had a lot of competition. We had competition from DEC, Data General, HP or Hewlett Packard, Honeywell, Burroughs, and NCR, Wang, Amdahl, Tandem, Four-Phase, Univac, Prime, Microdata. We had a lot. Most of our competition came from this middle group, DEC, Data General, HP, Honeywell, and Burroughs at the time. Very competitive environment. Well, one of the things that IBM announced in January 7th of 1975, they announced the IBM System 32 to go after this influx of new business coming from first-time computer buyers. They knew this was taking place, so they wanted to get their fair share of the business based upon new business. Well, in the very first week that this system was announced, there were over 2,000 inquiries that first week. That was unheard of in those days. That was a lot of inquiries back at that time. And in just 3 years, the IBM System 32 became the top installed system at IBM. Thousands and thousands of System 32s were installed in the first 3 years, and more beyond that. It was the first system in the industry to include both hardware and software, and you could get everything that you needed for less than $1,000 a month rental. So it was a great introduction, an easy way to get in, to use a computer system to automate your business for payroll, accounts payable, things like that, of things that you needed to run a business in the industry. It was an all-in-one computing system. It included a keyboard, it had a printer built in, had a small monitor built in to give you messages and instructions on what to do. It had internal memory, had a fixed disk drive which was 5 meg or 13 megabytes of data. Back in those days, all we had was data, so we didn't have images, no videos, no music, things like that that require lots more data. 5 to 13 meg was not a huge amount, but it was a substantial amount for a small to mid-sized business. And the other things, it had an 8-inch floppy diskette drive for backup purposes. Let's take a closer look at this system. It had an 8-inch floppy diskette drive to put diskettes in to read and write on those diskettes, and use those primarily for backup. All right, here's an 8-inch floppy diskette. Well, the backup process was this. You'd put the first diskette in, fire off the backup process, and the system would start backing up the data of what was on your system. All your master files, all your transaction files, and those kinds of things. And on the very first diskette, on the header label of the diskette, it would write "one of." Well, the operator would then put a physical label on the outside of the diskette, and she or he would put "one of" some number to come. Once that was done, when it finished loading or writing to that diskette, it would tell you to put the next diskette in. So alright, so you'd remove number 1 and you'd put the second diskette in, 2 of, that was labeled 2 of, and then on the system would actually write 2 of for that. It would continue this process until it finished the backup process. And let's say it finished on the 5th diskette. When it finished on the internal label, the header label, it would write 5 of 5. Well, what we would do as an operator, we'd go back to all these diskettes, and on the external label we'd write 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5. So we would know if we had to do a restore, what sequence we needed to put the diskettes in to be able to do that restore. So that was the backup process. Alright, well, you had 2 sets of backup. You had 1 set for data and 1 set for systems or your software, your business application software. Alright, so each one of those sets would be named 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, whatever number was in the total backup for those particular backups. We'll come back to this in a second. The other thing IBM introduced with the IBM System 32 was IAPS, Industry Application Programs. These were industry application software built specifically for a particular industry. We had one for hospitals, we had one for manufacturing, we had one for construction, there was one for accounting, medical groups, distribution, law firms, memberships. Well, there were probably 12 to 15 different industry application programs available to address first-time users in those industries. This was a very successful program that helped the sale of the IBM System 32. It was a major success for the IBM company. I want to emphasize before we go forward that with all this, we had a lot of first-time computer users. This was their first introduction to running and operating a computer system. You don't see that today because everybody's familiar with computers these days because it's on your cell phones everywhere. But back in those days, we didn't have all that. These were first-time computer users. Alright, well, I became an expert in 2 of the IAPs. I became an expert in the hospital IAP and the medical group IAP. And the reason for that was because these were the systems that I installed the most. I probably installed 8 or 9 hospitals, became very familiar with the hospital IAP, and a similar number of medical groups. Well, in 1978, I got the opportunity to sit on IBM's National Support Desk for 2 weeks. And what that was is I was going to sit on the support desk and answer questions for the hospital IAP, and also at other times I would go and see different types of jobs and different type of job opportunities within IBM. It was a career planning type of event, and also for me to provide some service while I was there. So I sat in on the support desk for a couple of weeks and got to see a lot of other things going on in IBM during that time frame. This was at the General Systems Division headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. So I go to Atlanta and I'm sitting on the help desk one day, and I remember getting this phone call from this lady in a hospital in Nebraska. Phone rings and I answer and I say something like, "IBM support, I'm Mike, how can I help you?" Well, the lady on the other end introduces herself and she says, "I'm getting an error message." And I say, "Tell me what it says and what you are doing." Then she says, "I'm restoring from my backup diskettes." And the error I got was error number 130, read error. Well, I tell her it sounds like a diskette sequencing problem, or maybe it's a hardware problem, not sure which. So let's take a look at it. So I ask her, "How many diskettes are in your backup?" And she tells me 5 diskettes. Alright, well, remember the backup process I showed you earlier? She had 5 diskettes, just like I showed you in the example I had. So she had a set of diskettes for backup, and they were labeled 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5, and 5 of 5. Well, each diskette has a digital label that the computer system writes onto it, and in the first diskette it says 1 of, second diskette says 2 of, 3 of, 4 of, and in the last diskette, when it finishes doing the backup, when it finishes writing all the data, it says 5 of 5. So it knows how many diskettes are in that set of backup diskettes. Every diskette has a digital label. Alright, so I ask her, what number is in the diskette drive? And she tells me number 1. So I start thinking to myself, maybe she mislabeled the diskettes, or somehow she switched the first 2 diskettes and she's got them out of sequence. So I'm thinking to myself, what could be causing this problem, this read error? So I tell her, let's try something. And I tell her to put diskette number 2 into the diskette drive and then select the option to continue. Alright, so she does that. She says okay, and she does that. Then she comes back and she says, now I'm getting a different error. This time it's error number 550, device error. So I say, wow, that sounds like a hardware error for sure. And I start thinking to myself, maybe we still have a sequence error. So let's try one more thing before calling in a CE, a customer engineer who works on hardware. So I tell her, put diskette number 3 into the drive and select continue. And then I get silence for a few seconds. And then she comes back, she says, honey, I can't get the 3rd diskette in the drive. I already have 2 in there, another one won't fit. Well, you might imagine, I about fell out of my chair when I heard her say this. I couldn't believe she was trying to squeeze more than 1 diskette into that diskette drive. Alright, so there's some valuable lessons associated with this funny story. Be sure the other person understands what you're saying, and be very specific. I should have said, take diskette number 1 out of the drive and put diskette number 2 in the drive. Take number 2 out of the drive and put diskette 3 into the drive. Alright, so you need to be very specific. Don't assume the other person on the other side understands what you're saying necessarily. Alright, so that's my story of too many diskettes. That was a funny story and a valuable lesson. I'm sure the lady in Nebraska still remembers this story, and she probably gets a chuckle out of it as well, even though she was kind of the one that was doing the issue. But maybe the chuckle is on me because I wasn't giving her specific instructions. Alright, I appreciate you watching my video. I hope you'll subscribe to my IT Manager Institute channel. Hit the thumbs up if you like this one, and hit the notification bell, and it'll give you an update when I put in new videos on this channel. If you're interested in more IT Manager resources, take a look at my website at itmanagerinstitute.com. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you soon.